Welcome to SGTV. Today's episode is part of our Job Routes for Electricians mini-series. We'll be talking to various electricians about the different routes you as an electrician can take in the industry. So part of this mini-series, we've got episodes featuring domestic installers, rail, industrial, agricultural, tutoring. And today's episode, we're going to be talking to Mark Reeves, who's director of Reeves Associates. And Mark is an engineering consultant. So that's the topic for today's episode. So, Mark, it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Yeah, pleased to help out, obviously, and talk about obviously the route, obviously, which I've done over many years, but obviously be interested just obviously for young electricians to see obviously what the routes are for the future.
Yeah. So I'm a bit lost on this one, I'll be honest, mate. When I hear engineering, I'm seeing CNC machines and high profile lathes and that kind of thing. So
yeah, you're right. To be honest, the word engineering is always misused. I think a lot of people now call it building services, like engineering, basically, because you're right. Engineering to me is working, I don't know, making tools, working in a factory, producing, like, yeah, as you say, mechanical. But no, I think it's the word mechanical, electrical, whereas electrical is a bit more straightforward. But some people say a mechanical engineer doesn't realise he's designing air conditioning, ventilation, heating. But as you say, I think a lot of people now call it more building services, and that's what a lot of the courses, obviously the degree courses or HNC, ONC, are based around building services. So I think there is this misconception regarding that they think it's engineering and it's not. Basically, there's a lot more to it. Basically, so
yeah. So what is an engineering consultant?
Basically, you have obviously different, obviously design team. You're starting off with an architect who obviously designs the building, and basically with the services, it's basically everything within the building. The engineering services consultants design. So that starts off with the basic, obviously incoming supplies. We sort out the incoming water, the incoming gas, the electricity. We size those supplies up, and then basically it's then designing the number of lights within the room, the number of heating radiators in the room, the ventilation, the flow rates, sometimes air conditioning, sprinklers. So, in some respects, you've got to be a master of all trades in sometimes, because sometimes when I speak to a lighting engineer, all he does is lighting. Whereas when you're an M&E consultant, you have to be we've got about lighting, power, fire alarm, security, voice and data. So it is good because it opens quite a wide spectrum, basically. And what I find is when you speak to specialist companies, they're already there to help as well. So I think you don't got to be worried that you don't know it all. And I think no one knows it all. And in this industry, you learn, you are literally every day, because there's different problems. And sometimes you find that the problems are sometimes the simplest problems that people don't ask that question. And I think I always say to young engineers, don't always say, ask the stupid question, because sometimes
Yeah.
people are afraid to ask that question, and there's nothing wrong with just asking the simple question, because sometimes the simple things get missed. And I find that a lot, that it's if anyone would have said from the start of the job, well, has anybody thought about that? So I think, so young engineers definitely, ask the obvious question. If you don't be worried, because I think a lot of when we have design team meetings, and it's always difficult, I think, as a young engineer, what to say, because sometimes you see obviously an older, like an architect or a project manager, and sometimes you think, oh, they've got more experience. But I think also it helps you gather your experience if you can raise questions. So basically, back to the question, it's designing everything relating to a building. Basically, you have part of the team, you'll have a structural engineer who obviously designs the structure. They work closely with the architect, because obviously you've got to get the building to stand up. But then we get involved, because you imagine structurally there's some big beams going across, so we then have to design the services to fit round both the architect and the structural. So again, you get involved on buildings at very early stages. And I think also you learn is you don't just go full straight in on the design. Sometimes you're waiting for months sometimes before you can actually do a lot of design work. A lot of the times you just go into meetings talking about obviously probably the infrastructure and like concepts. So So it's basically, yeah, it's designing everything within a building: heating, vents, lighting, power, fire alarm. But there's also a lot of technical calculations as well, because obviously to work out the size of a radiator, you've got to look at basically the building fabric, and basically within the building, obviously the components, there's brick, there's glass, they all contain heat and they all give off heat. So you have to do a lot of calculations, which, to be fair, when you find that most, if you're even an electrician or graduate, when you start for a consultant, a lot of the time you will probably do a lot of like Excel calculation sheets, and also CAD. Obviously, you do a lot. I know one of the consultants, we had some, my last practice, that for 2 years, all they literally did with the young engineers was CAD, which I think is not quite right, really, because I think to get to learn, it's best to go out to meetings, engineer, and learn obviously what goes on at meetings, basically.
So is it mainly commercial commercial and industrial buildings that you're working on?
No. Again, I think as an M&E consultant, you have the full range. You can be, at the moment in Birmingham, the Birmingham sector, there's lots of resi, mainly because of the high speed 2, and obviously they're looking at residential. So no, you can be working on a residential project. You can be then working on something like a fire station. You can be then working in a warehouse, and I think that's the good thing about it. You're not like pigeonhole in one sector. You can work in everything, as you say. Most of the sectors, obviously, they're classic as retail, whereas a consultant, you don't tend to get in because, well, retail is obviously slowing down at the moment, obviously because obviously the COVID and obviously the internet. But a lot of retail is basically fitting out shop fitters, which they don't tend to have consultants because, I don't know, a brand like Next would have a standard specification, so they would give it to the contractor. They don't have to worry about a design because it's been done. But no, it's like basically there's obviously the residential sector, which under the residential, you can be an extra care, it could be a house, it could be apartment blocks, and then you have extra care, which is like for elderly, which is getting more involved. And then there's the healthcare, which is a massive sector, obviously the NHS and hospitals, private hospitals. Now, with the hospitals, they have certain standards, which are obviously linked to the NHS. So again, what I sometimes when you keep working in the same sector, you get very familiar. And I think sometimes it's good to work in a sector you're not familiar with, because the standards, and which you got to obviously, you read up more, and I think it makes it a bit more interesting. But no, from my history, I've worked for car showrooms. I've done like big cash distribution centres for Bank of England. I've done it's actually quite a good, it was a scenario from 9/11. It was for the fire service, and it was recreating a building after 9/11, and that was really interesting. It had an underground bunker where they had listening devices and they had cameras, and it was simulating smoke, and they had tunnels where they had obviously people. So you really do, there's not every day is the same. I was going to say different, but you can get called, and we're doing a valeting bay, a car valeting bay, where they've got 6,000 cars in Leicester. So you do get involved in quite a very, very workload as well.
So if you're having to deal with sort of plumbing, a bit of everything. Yeah. I want to just sort of rewind to sort of your training and how you got to where you are now, because a lot of people in the trades are very aware. You know, you've got your electricians, you've got your plumbers, your plasterers, everything. It's not often that you really, especially on a commercial job, be doing someone else's work, due to qualifications, standards, regs, all that kind of thing. So how did you start off to where you are now to have that knowledge?
I served, again, I left school at 16 because this was back in 1979. And I went for an interview at the Construction Industry Training Board. And basically then I got selected to be an apprentice electrician. And then they selected, I think there was about 7 or 8 companies. And then they just literally say, oh, you're going to start with that company. So I served a 4.5 years apprenticeship with a company. And even that, my brother was an electrician, and it's like most people at 16, you don't really know what you want to do. And I know it's different now because obviously you don't leave school at 16, but my brother was an electrician. My brother was a fire alarm engineer, and I'd help my brother at weekends, sometimes help putting lights up and things like that. So I thought, I'll go for that. I started as an apprentice electrician, which again was good because I worked for a fairly big company. We did some work at a shopping centre in Redditch, I did work at Cadbury's. We did some residential blocks. I mean, and for probably 18 months, I was at Birmingham Airport. But the problem was when I finished, it was the 83. There was like another recession, so I got made redundant. But I was still carrying on. I'd done my electrician's like qualifications, and then I carried on to do the ONC because I wanted to move into design. So I think from the craft side, it does take longer because you can't just go straight into degree. So I think I did an ONC, which was 2 years, and then I did an HNC, which was another 2 years. And to be fair, yes, it is harder when you're an electrician doing like design, because there was obviously friends who were working at college. They were working for consultants. Of course, they had all the material. So again, I'm not saying it was hard work, and like people, you have to work weekends. You have to obviously try and work a bit harder because you're not in an office where you've got all these catalogues and things on there. But to be fair, I think like everything else, as long as you're determined, you can do it. And when I got made redundant, I was only redundant for a week, and I got a job as electrician a company called Barry Beard in Bromsgrove, and they let me carry on at college as long as I worked an extra day. And that was tough because I was work obviously 4 days a week, then I'd work a day at college, which was up till like sometimes 9 o'clock at night, and then I had to work all day Saturday. But again, I was determined, and then I got a job then. I was only there for 9 months with Birmingham City Council in their engineers department doing small designs.
Yeah.
And I think the reason why I got the job, because they saw I was determined as someone to work Saturdays to carry on. So I think the different routes are, you've got obviously, if you're an electrician, you're really obviously, it's difficult to change like sector and come as a mechanical engineer. And I think if you're an electrician and if you're enjoying it, it's the next step is to look at the design. But I really think that people I know that's come from that route, I tend to be overall, they've got a better experience because a lot of people who get, no disrespect for people who do a degree straight from obviously school, university, but they haven't got the on-site experience. So I always think that people who have got the on-site experience will benefit in the future.
What was it that sort of attracted you to it, though?
Well, to be totally honest, what the first one was, a company car, because I saw where I was working.
What car was it?
well, no, I didn't get it. But what it was, I saw when I was working at Birmingham Airport, there was all the electricians, and then the design engineers would come out, and they were all with like company cars. Thinking, oh, how do I get a company car? But it was more than that, really. To be honest, I was more in. I think because I was at college with people who worked for consultants, and it quite interested me doing more the design. But yeah, I think it was that. It was basically there's nothing wrong with being on the tools, and obviously you can make a good living of it. In fact, one thing to say as well is when you start off, when I was an apprentice electrician my last year, I was working 7 days a week at Birmingham Airport because they needed obviously to get the job finished. And I remember, I think this was going back at 1983, I was picking up probably £500 a week, which may not sound a lot now, but that's probably worth,
especially, yeah.
It's probably over £1,000. It's probably over £1,000 now. And then when I got a job with the council, my first salary was 5,300, and that was like, you're probably talking a drop of probably half the salary. So I think you've got to, if you come from the tools, that's one thing you got to realise is that when you start off, the money won't be as good. It will increase, and you probably will increase, you earn more. But that's one important thing, is that if you come off the tools, because obviously you get overtime, you get traveling, whereas when in an office you don't. But luckily what I'd done, I'd saved quite a bit of the money I was earning, and then obviously that helped me when I was starting. But it does then increase basically. But that's one thing to do, that obviously from the craft side or the on site, you won't be earning as much when you start off basically. So
I mean, that's something we say to a lot of electricians anyway, especially people that are later in their career and they want to get into the industry.
Yeah.
I know, I could name names, but they've gone from a completely different career. They've thought, right, I know I'm going to have to take a drop for a couple of years, if not more, but I know that it will balance back up, and if not, accelerate even more.
No, because I remember, my wife now, my girlfriend, and she was a bit concerned when obviously we weren't saving up for a house or anything, but from going from like probably half the salary. But I did say, well, it's something I want to do, and obviously they were paying for my college fees as well, and it was definitely the best decision I made. But what was quite good though, because working for Birmingham City Engineers Department, I worked for the maintenance department, and literally we were looking after buildings that were probably over 12 months old. So it was good because you could see what a lot of the times it's stupid things. There was no spare capacity, like capacity on distribution boards. There was no spare way. So you wanted to add circuits, it was a pain, or there was plasterboard ceilings, you couldn't get access. So for me, that was really good because I worked there for 4 years, and I worked for there's two engineers. I worked one for the south side of the city, one for the north, and it was typical local authority. The engineers, the older guys, didn't want to go out on site, and me and the other technician, they say, we got 6 jobs for you, and they could be, oh, relighting a school, oh, we're doing an old people's home with care extension, can you go and meet the like the contractors? So it was good actually. It was like, instead of going straight into the design, it was like still doing design but on a smaller scale.
Yeah.
But I think, yeah, I think for people, I think it depends really what sector, because if you're a mechanical engineer, that basically, obviously you're a pipe fitter, and obviously they do a bit of ventilation, it's probably staying in that sector really. It's very difficult to move from one to the other. I don't know many people that's probably been a mechanical engineer that's then coming to be an electrical design engineer. Not saying it can't be done, because I think it can be, but I think the issue probably is, again, is that a lot of companies, if you're an electrician, they want you to train you to be an electrician, and it depends how willing they are for you then to obviously to carry on that learning. Basically, it's whether you have to stop and do it yourself, basically as like a full-time course. But I think a lot of companies realize that that the industry, that it's a definite shortage of engineers, because I think what's happened is that it's not always the most glamorous industry to go in, and a lot of people, I always hear that a lot of companies finding it so difficult now to get design engineers. It really is.
One thing I have heard though, I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong in this, is that engineers, especially electrical engineers and mechanical engineers, the whole world is crying out for them, and it can take you anywhere, take you all over the world.
I got offered a job in Australia. We were going on, well, my brother-in-law immigrated, and we went over for a holiday, and I'd seen an advert in one of the magazines, and while I was there, I thought I'll follow it up. And yes, but it wasn't the right time. But definitely, I think if you're in that industry, you can work all over the world, because what you find is that the British standards are used, obviously in Australia they use, because obviously part of the Commonwealth, but even Dubai, the Middle East, they use the British standards, which we designed to. America is slightly different, but again, it's all much for much, basically. So yeah, you can work all over the world in this industry, and there is definitely a shortage. And I think it's probably it's only going to get worse, I think, anyway, as things, because you say the problem is that, and I think it's the same with craft side as well. I think, as you know, a lot of people, tradesmen, it's very difficult to get hold of them. And I think the problem sometimes is that young people don't really want to get their hands dirty and work on building sites. But again, it can be very rewarding. So
I think a lot of it comes down to just being aware of the options.
Yeah.
It's something I've spoke about numerous times, but what I'd like to ask though, what a typical day looks like for you, sort of from start to finish. I know you said that it can vary, but just giving
Yeah.
insight into how it can
Yeah.
be.
Basically, it depends really because another thing as well, you're working on multiple jobs. You don't tend nowadays just to work on one job. Probably as a younger engineer, you probably do. But for me as a director, we've probably got around about probably 10, 15 projects at the moment. So a lot of it is answering day-to-day emails. And like everybody else, everybody's had enough of emails, because obviously the world your day is dominated by emails. But it's probably a mixture really. It's answering day-to-day stuff about emails, queries on, like we're doing a apartment block where there's queries on the U values. If a builder can't achieve that U value, how does that affect? Have we got to put more PV on? So me being a director, we've got a guy that does our energy, we've got another guy that does our electrical calculations. So to me as a director, I'm speaking to all those individuals basically. And I think another important thing for young engineers is pick pick up the phone, because I find that a lot, that when I worked, I was looking after about 15 engineers. A lot of the younger engineers just wouldn't pick up the phone, and it's very, you learn so much. But yes, you can send an email once you spoke, but I always say to the engineers, did you speak to the engineer? No. Well, speak to him. You will learn more from speaking to an engineer. So to me, it's a typical day is doing some drawings. I can mark up some drawings, because again, I think it's important for young engineers if they can do CAD. And obviously that's another thing. My son Greg, who works for us, he came to work experience, and he wanted to be a mechanical engineer. So I said to him, to be now a design engineer, you need to do CAD. So we paid for him, and he did CAD on the evening as an evening course. And I think that's important, because I'm a lot older now. I did learn CAD, but it's one of these things, if you don't do it every day, it don't mean a thing. So I tend to hand mark drawings, scan it and send it to our CAD, who then draws it up. But Greg and a lot of the other engineers now will go straight to designing. I think that's an important thing for young engineers to move into the design, is to do a simple sitting girls. You can do them on evenings, just an AutoCAD course, because they would expect you. And I think I said previously, as some of the bigger consultants, they want you to do CAD basically for I say up to about 12 to 2 years basically, where again you learn a lot. And Greg now, obviously, he can knock drawings off really, really fast because he's used to doing it. But I think I'd stress that I think if you want to come into the industry, you've got to have the facility to do CAD, because you probably, obviously, with Revit or BIM, the 3D, that's a bit more complicated. It's not like you can't learn that instantly. But I think when you're working for consultancy, they have BIM engineers who then can teach you to do that, because that's the technology will go 3D, whereas everybody's designing straight to 3D. You find it doesn't. Not the stuff that we're doing, we don't do it, but the bigger, if you're talking like a lot of the government or local authorities expect it to be in BIM. But again, I think that's the thing I would say to engineers: learn to do AutoCAD, because if you're going to move into the design, that's what you would expect to do. But again, there's lots of software out there now that will actually produce 3D from basic 2D as well. So
and there's YouTube, things like that.
Well, there is. There's so much. There's so much learning. But back to my day, it's probably it's a mixture of obviously answering emails, general queries, or attending design team meetings. And now obviously with COVID, what we're doing today is Zoom or Teams. So which has helped actually, because a lot of the times, like if you're doing a job in London, you'd probably spend 2.5 hours drive or getting on the train, going to the meeting. And sometimes, because the M&E is such a small amount, sometimes the architect to be there, a structural engineer or the QS talking for about an hour, and you're probably saying 5-10 minutes of items, but you have to be there because obviously they tell you about changes to the building. So I think with Teams now and Zoom, it has helped, because you haven't got that traveling time where. And to be fair, on the train, it's not too bad because you can answer emails. But when you're driving, you can't answer emails. So I think Teams and Zooms definitely helped, obviously, be more productive. But you do find that a lot of meetings now are called for meeting's sake sometimes. I think you got to realise that certain jobs you have meetings weekly, some you have monthly. But I think that, especially nowadays, because everything's rush, sometimes you have weekly meetings and it's allowing that time as well. And the problem is sometimes, like any business, if you have a meeting, you probably have, I don't know, 4 or 5 actions. And then that affects your following day, because you think, oh, I've got today to do this. You have one meeting and then, oh, that's urgent. So it's like everything else. So you have a list. You always do a list of things you want to do. But sometimes you have one phone call and it buggers it all up, and then you're playing catch up. But that's the same with the industry, I imagine, anyway. So
yeah, I do find the beauty of these kind of Zoom and Teams. It can actually, I know nothing beats meeting people face to face, and it's nice sometimes to catch up. But I think if you're busy and you're in a rush, I do think these kind of meetings, they actually eliminate a lot of the chitter chatter.
Well, they do.
And you just get it done. Yeah. You get what you need. You get the information that you need.
I think as long as it's a bit like emails. Really, emails should be just like a basic yes, no, or can we meet? Yes, that's fine. But they're not like that anymore now. And I always say to engineers that if because I've got an older guy who works for us who's like early 60s, very good, but of course, and I think it's another important thing is address the email to your audience. Now, he was very technical and he'd send an email that quoting flow rates, manufacturers reference 4, 5, 6, 7, that. And I said to him, all the client wants to know is, have we sorted it? Or yes, or what's the additional cost? He doesn't want to and I always say to people, you get bored, don't you? If you're going to do a report, do it as a separate attachment, because people get bored of reading emails as long as they don't get to the point. So, but emails are a part of the day, and obviously everybody now has to answer emails. And I think what you find on teams, on meetings in the construction industry, you've got an architect, you've got the project manager, you've got a structural engineer, and when they copy everybody in, you do get a lot of emails, and sometimes you have to look through, or do they want an answer from me or not? Because it's very sometimes difficult, isn't it, really? So
yeah, I think whatever part of the trade you're in, whatever part of the industry or experience, learning how to speak to different people and the way they want to be spoken to is something you just have to learn. You know, and some people might want the technical, every little last bit. Some people might just want a straightforward answer.
And I think I was conscious from going on the tools, because obviously on the tools, going back when I was on the tools, there wasn't such thing as mobile phones, but you don't speak to a lot of people on the phone in the day. But so when you're in an office, you are it's more email now, and sometimes you're conscious when you're on the phone thinking of people listening. Well, they're not, because they're getting on with it. But I think don't be afraid as well, again, to pick up the phone and ask questions, because you find that the manufacturers out there, like a lighting manufacturer, are willing to help. Because at the end of the day, obviously, they want to sell the business. So there is always help, and especially nowadays with Google, it's so much better as well, because they say there's always something on Google, on the internet, that can help young engineers anyway. And I think when you work for a bigger company, there's always people there who tend to give the time to younger engineers and help them out. So
yeah, well, one thing I want to ask as well, if you're, I know we spoke about how you got into the industry and how when you're younger you go through the routes. But let's say you've been, I don't know, working in IT for the past 10 years or whatever it is, and now you've decided, I want to get into electrical engineering. So how would an adult learner make that change?
I think, again, you'd have to go to one of the local universities and see what courses are available. It depends really what background. Yes, if you've done like IT, it depends really. If because a lot of the modules are very similar, I think you'd have to really speak to the different universities to say what your background is and what experience you've had, because they're probably tailored to say, well, actually, yes, you can move into. So there's nothing to say you cannot move, obviously, into a different industry. But I think you've got to be realistic. You may have to come in a lower level just to learn the background. I think that's the difference. Where I think I did know somebody, I can't remember which actually his background he was, but he moved into electrical and he wasn't. I think it was photocopiers actually. He was repairing photocopiers, and but he'd done like the basic electronics and some of the electrical. But I think he had to start a lower year just to get through the basics, basically, because it's like the different modules to tick. So I think really you'd have to speak to a university to ask them really which is the best course to suit them. That you may have to go at a lower rate initially, but again, there's nothing wrong, because again, moving into a different sector, if you've got somebody who's very good on IT, that would help him be an electrical engineer when in the future, when you do, obviously we have to do voice and data, we have to do cabinet, so again that would help as well. And I think certain companies, engineers specialize in different topics, so again, I think that's a bonus to somebody to say, well, actually, I've spent 10 years in IT, I want to move over, but you'll always linked with that IT. So I think, again, you see it as a benefit that's going forward.
But there's nothing stopping. I mean, I used IT as an example. So, like you say, though, it depends on your past experience. If you've been a carpenter, that might come in handy in some form. Or, you know, working in a warehouse, I don't know. Maybe you're gonna look at your experiences and use it as a positive, like you say.
Yeah, a lot of it though is all the practical experience, and a lot of the time is visualizing, because we're just designing 2D all the time, on looking on paper, and sometimes it's difficult to visualize. But if you've been on a building site, you know what it looks like, you know what that building fabric looks like. So again, that helps as well. So
I've got a question here wrote down. Looks like a complicated one, but it's to do with the qualifications. So I've got incorporated engineer in brackets IENG versus bachelor's degree in engineering BENG. So I'll leave that one to you. What's all that about?
Yeah, basically, obviously, because I came the trade, like the construction trade route. I think nowadays a lot of people, because a lot of it's degree based, isn't it? Everybody seems to want a degree, but I didn't. And well, to be fair, when I finished my HNC, because I worked for the maintenance department, they wouldn't let me do a degree course. My colleagues who was at college were in the design department went straight to do the degree, but they needed to do level 4 maths. So I paid extra to do level 4 maths on the night time, and I thought I'd move into the design department. Well, I moved into the design department by Christmas, and they said you've missed too much for the degree course. And then the following year, the degree course wasn't run because literally there wasn't enough people. So I never actually had the degree. I never actually finished my degree. But to be fair, that's never stopped me, because I think, like everybody else, it's what you can offer, what you can bring. Because yes, it's great to have obviously a BSc, a degree. Obviously, it's very good. But at the end of the day, it's the experience and what you can bring. So I wouldn't put people off that say you've got to get, because again, an engineer who worked on my last practice, he stopped at an ONC. He was a great engineer. And I know to be chartered, because obviously you need a degree to be chartered now. And I think that is the thing, to be a chartered engineer. But I was an IEng, which is like incorporated engineer, compared with a chartered engineer. And to be fair, like, again, I'm running my own business. No one's ever said to me, you're not chartered, you're not doing the business. Because at the end of the day, it's, can you do the job? Yes, we can do the job. Yes, I think it helps going for a job. Obviously, if you can say you're you've got a degree, but I think at the moment it's eagerness. People would rather see someone who's keen, wants to learn, that may not have that qualification. But it's not saying you haven't had that chance to do that qualification, and you're never too old, because obviously a lot of companies now will continue to learning. Obviously, will continue. And I think to be a chartered engineer anyway, you need a degree, but you probably need another 5-10 years experience anyway to be registered. So, but no, I think because I came for the craft side, and if I'd perhaps moved a bit earlier, I might have done my degree. But I do know companies where I've worked in London where it's been the MD didn't have a degree, because at the end of the day, it's, you do the job, and it's all down to personality as well. I think if you've got a good personality and people see you enthusiastic, that's what you want. At the end of the day, you could have a great guy with the best qualifications, but if he's not enthusiastic, he's not open, he's not speaking, then who would you rather have? You'd rather have the guy that's obviously who's keen, and obviously can do the job. So
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, to be
yeah.
honest. When we're talking about regs and things like that, we obviously, a lot of our audience will be aware of 18th edition and that kind of thing for your electrical part. But how does that sort of play into what you do in terms of regs and all that kind of thing?
Well, to be totally honest, and I find this a lot with consultants, you probably find electricians are probably more up to the regs than we are, because at the end of the day, we design with the regs, but most of the regs is down to the installation. So again, I wouldn't worry about the regs, because again, obviously you can buy regs, you can buy guide to the regs. So I think it's more to do the design. But again, there's design software out there. Electrically, there's software called Amtech, where you put in all the different distribution boards, you take off the cable lengths, and it works out the calculations for you, which is in line with the regulations. So to be fair, again, I think that if you've an electrician who's good knowledge of the regulations, that will help as well, because a lot of the queries we get, being a consultant, is a client or a main contractor may query the standard of insulation. Well, the regulations is basically a guide, but it's a recommendation. Is it a requirement? Now, most electricians will know, because they've got to be up to date on the regs. They are probably better. So in some respects, I think if you've got a good knowledge of the regulations, that will help you as a consultant. Because as I said before, as a consultant, because you're in different sectors, you're doing a fire alarm design, you're doing a lighting design, you're doing small power. Whereas electrician, the regs is like your Bible in some respects. So you're going to know it better than a consultant. So
does it pay to have good relationship with a team of electricians, or does it vary depending on where you are?
it's where you were. But I always say to the guys that get on with the guys on site, because you're all as a team now, because you've designed it, but at the end of the day, the electrician's got to install it. So you want to get on with him. And sometimes the guys are on site, they're on site for like 5 days days a week, you're not. And sometimes the electrician will ring up and say, well, actually, I found a better route of doing this. So you speak to them, and you come to site and say, yes, you're right, you agree. So I think sometimes you're all, because I think I've learned that it's the same as the design team. You've got the structural, the architect, the QS. Now, in the design team, if someone doesn't perform, you all get tired with the same brush. And it's a bit like you've got to get on with the site foreman, the builder, because at the end of the day, you all want to, you're all there to achieve the same goal, to build a building. So I think it's good. Well, it's important to get good relationships with the guys who are installing from your design. At the end of the day, they can give you some professional advice. Sometimes they say, well, oh no, there's a reason behind this, but sometimes it's always useful to listen to what they say, because as I say, they've walked around that building more than you have, and when you haven't probably been to site for 2 or 3 months, and they know the building. So again, important thing when you do work as a consultant is get on with the guys on site.
Yeah. Don't be too proud.
Don't be too proud. Don't think, oh yeah, because a lot of we're speaking to clients. A lot of consultants tend to think, I'm a consultant now, I'm not going to sites. Oh, that's down to the contractor. Well, it's not, because at the end of the day, you designed it. And yes, there's different ways you can install things, but don't we should say too proud to listen to the electrician. He'll probably know he's probably found a great solution. So yeah, that's another thing is, and because you're a consultant doesn't mean you can't obviously speak to the electrician and all the rest. So yeah, and important, you've all got to get on as a team. So
how many opportunities would you say there are, or do you think there's a good opportunity for employed engineers to actually start upon their own and go self-employed?
It's probably it'd be more difficult. I think it's easier to go self-employed as an electrician, because obviously, or pipe fitter or IT, because obviously there's lots of sites you can work. It's difficult to suddenly come as a design consultant, because people don't know you, and it's like everything. There's a network basically. For me, I've set up Reeves Associates last year. I was made redundant because they were the company I worked with was closing the Birmingham office. They were selling the company and they wanted to close. So in some respects, they were all my clients. I'd been there for 5 years. They were all my clients. So in some respects, it helped me. But you've got to have a network, and I think that's the problem. To suddenly, I think the other issue you can look at is be a contract engineer. Whereas if you want to obviously work for different consultancies, that's a good route, because again, that gives you an idea. You're working for different consultants, and you can see how they work and what the relationship is in the office. Is it a good vibe? So I'd probably say that if you're going self-employed, I'd probably go as a contract engineer. So that way you can see, and also I think a lot of consultants, if you're working contracts and you're very good, they'll probably want to make you a permanent one as well. So it gives you that opportunity as well. Because again, there aren't many I know good like contract engineers, because if they're that good, people snap them up. If you know what I mean. So it's, I think to advertise yourself as a consultant when you haven't worked for a company would be very difficult. So.
What would be your final advice for anyone thinking about not only getting into the industry, but progressing from where they are in the industry into what you do?
I think don't be afraid. I think you need to obviously contact as many companies as you can, basically. And I think as long as you're honest with them where you are and where you want to be, I think there's definitely I really do, because we used to do like work experience, and some of them were there and they've just gone through the motions, and you could tell the ones who were really interested, and you knew they're the ones that would be successful. So I think don't be afraid, and you're going to get turned down because there's certain companies that obviously don't want to train, they just want someone in. But there's definitely now, because a lot of the companies, they have like the graduates, but they're also interested in taking people on who are perhaps like less qualified, who want to come in the industry. So I think definitely send that email. Just obviously there's lots of companies, you go on the internet, find out all the building services consultants and just email them. And I think they'd probably be surprised that as long as that, as you say, they give them an honest where they want to be, and they want, it's like it's their drive, then I think that realistically they would take them on.
And would you say it's an enjoyable industry, an enjoyable job?
Yeah. It's like most stuff now. I think it's just a time now. That like everything now is that everybody wants everything like 90 miles an hour. And I think the only frustrating time is sometimes clients sit on projects, and I know a lot of the time it's get the right, and then suddenly it's full steam ahead, and you're thinking, if only you contacted us like 2 months ago. But no, it's good and it's rewarding, and as you say, you get involved in different sectors. And so I think that's a good thing. You're not just in one you're not. I think you work for a big company, you may be working on a hospital. If it's just like the QE hospital, you're probably working there on 5 years. But a lot of the times you're probably working. I think the design is probably 6 weeks. You've done the 6 weeks design, and then you're doing another project. But then it's probably the early stages, and then you got a bit of site supervision as well. So you've got a bit of everything. You're doing design, meetings, site supervision, or even condition surveys. So you're doing a complete mixture basically, and that's where I think the learning is, doing different style of projects.
Yeah. So that brings us to the end of today's episode. I want to thank you for coming on and speaking to our audience, Mark. It's greatly appreciated.
No, it's fine. No, so
yeah, and as I said before, and this is part of our mini series. So there's so many different routes that you can take as an electrician. As we just heard from Mark, you've got an engineering consultant, there's domestic installers, industrial, agricultural, so many. They're all part of this mini series. So make sure you like, subscribe, hit the notification button below to be able to see all of those videos and the rest from us here at SGTV. So anyway, thank you, Mark, and thank you all for watching.